So, for example, I got embroiled in a dispute the last time I was in the UK about the issue of the gender pay gap. And from a social science perspective, the idea of the gender pay gap is it's so poorly formulated that it's almost staggering to me that people can even conceptualize it in this manner. It's not a univariate problem. It's a multivariate problem. Men and women don't make the same amount of money. So we can break it down
and then we can go through
No, not only could we have to.
Jordan Peterson, the ever-polarizing intellectual who glorifies in impassioned debates, is well acquainted with head-on collisions of ideologies. One of his most memorable glories? A scientifically but predictably successful attempt by a feminist to try to cancel him. Spoiler, not quite basking in the glory. Peterson's name alone is a lightning rod for controversy, especially around gender, equality, and power. This particular feminist came well equipped with the standard talking points, which understandably would have fallen like 9 pins before Peterson's surgical skills of argumentation. Ah, the gender pay gap, the holy grail of feminist discourse, and it is Peterson's bread and butter. The simple claim was that women earn less than men due to systematic oppression. Cue Peterson's signature eyebrow raise. Instead of just out-and-out denying that the pay gap existed, Peterson moved into subtlety. Wage disparity was not, he insisted, a one-variable reality. It's a complex, multivariate thing. Dangerous jobs? Mostly men. Longer hours? Men again. Leadership roles? More men want those. Women, on the other hand, straddle careers that are mostly people-centered. Teaching, nursing, and social work. That wasn't to suggest that women are incapable of succeeding in high-paying fields, but rather that it was an individual choice that had a gargantuan effect. It went bombshell for Peterson, and the feminists couldn't quite turn it without reverting to generic tropes.
Do you think do women have opportunity? Do women have equality of opportunity than broadly across Western societies?
Compared to what?
Compared to not having equality of opportunity.
Well, compared to 100 years ago, yes. Compared to 50 years ago, yes. Compared to most places in the world throughout history, yes. Compared to a hypothetical ideal, no.
Here is where philosophical rubber hit the road. The feminists championed equity, equality of participation of all groups in all fields. Peterson, however, would quickly label this utopian nonsense. His counter? Equality of outcome as a goal for society has historically created the worst consequences. Ask anyone who has ever studied 20th century totalitarian regimes. That's the difference between Peterson and equality of opportunity. You have the liberty to succeed or fail according to your own merits. He argued that mandating outcomes, whether it be in gender representation or anything else, risks undermining competence and ambition. It's not about putting people in boxes, it's about keeping the game fair.
But
would that hypothetical ideal be a good ideal or a bad ideal?
Well, it depends on how you define equality. If you define it as equality of outcome, then it's a catastrophic ideal. See, this is something too. One of the things I've been struggling with recently is the idea of boundaries, let's say.
When that topic comes to Scandinavia, the Czech feminist must have thought she held a firm trump card. Surely, those bastions of progressivism would side with her. Wrong. Countries like Norway and Sweden, despite being the most free of all in the world, show the greatest differences in both men's and women's career preferences. How? Because people in free choice move toward their instinct. Women find fulfilling work through caregiving occupations, while men generally do in engineering or technology. It is not a patriarchy in work human nature, but rather by choice.
We know absolutely, and this is relevant to your questions on progressivism, we know that the left can go too far, and we know that the right can go too far. I mean, I would say that's the abject lesson of the 20th century. Both can go too far. And we kind of know when the right goes too far. We probably think the right goes too far.
The feminists' counter? Let's just say it did not possess nearly the same empirical heft. As always, Peterson's point is supported by data, leaving little room for ideological squirming. It wouldn't be a Peterson talk if it did not involve biology. As expected, it was soon decided that gender is a social construct and, indeed, Peterson exhumed this entirely with a scalpel. He recognized and acknowledged that though there are far more similarities between men and women, ignoring all the biological distinctions is ignorance and a danger in itself. Men, Peterson, would point out have overlapping personalities, diverging mostly on the fringes. For instance, aggression is more prominent in men, which explains their strong representation in jails, whereas women are scored in higher measures of agreeableness and emotional sensitivity, which cue them towards people-oriented careers. The attempt to counter this argument with a study about brains identical to each other backfired with the feminists, because Peterson clarified that no adequate scientist assumed that brains in a male and female are completely associated. At one time, the polemic strayed towards societal dissatisfaction. The feminists testified that increasing but more particularly evident dissatisfaction among women showed a systemic failure. To this last, Peterson's answer is a mic drop moment. Peterson then went on to say that most of this dissatisfaction could be attributed to jealousy and a lack of gratitude. Such societies have achieved quite a lot in terms of gender equality over the last century, he added. He said nothing simply to diminish everyone's legitimate concern, but it is high time that we're reminded to recognize how far we've come. Just as everyone expected, the feminist bristled at this, but her counter-arguments could hardly be said to hold up under Peterson's well-historicized perspective.
The drum is being beat very, very hard, perhaps not so much here, but in North America, for equality of opportunity or equality of outcome, under the rubric of equity. And equity is essentially a doctrine that fosters the notion that equality of outcome is not only desirable, but should be pursued as an object or as an explicit aspect of public policy.
Another significant moment in their talk was when they spoke about job choices. The feminists said that it clearly showed systemic discrimination that women were being underrepresented in higher paying jobs. Peterson, not impressed, had another argument: occupational scaling. Men take the riskier, heavier, and more geographically mobile jobs like oil rigging, construction, or long-haul trucking. Each of these jobs pay more than any average job size, but has certain sacrifices that many people would not be willing to do. Women, on average, would prefer to prioritize work-life balance and job satisfaction over work that is generally high stress and high risk. It's not sexism, really. It's a preference. Peterson commented neither to undermine women's contributions to society at large, nor to concreate their contribution to a one-dimensional narrative in which every disparity is reduced to a lack of discrimination. The feminist answer? A typical familiar cocktail of anecdote and indignation without much else. And last but not least, no feminist argument is complete without the issue of quotas. The feminists took a point arguing about the necessity of instituting quotas to even the playing fields because all others in leadership and high-stake positions would also be equal. Peterson's take? Quotas are a dangerous game. He argued that it might weaken institutions through everything, but efficiency over diversity did not allow him to argue the feminist petition that quotas would bring justice to historical injustices. It was foolish to intend equality of outcomes, he said, as it just incurred other problems that included resentment and tokenism. The feminists' great aim now seemed clear: to say that Peterson was a remnant of ancient notions, but it was very well known that Peterson, the player of chess, saw such moves a mile away. He called it what it is: cancel culture, an intellectual shortcut rather than dealing with the matter. Critics silenced dissent. Peterson doesn't recede under fire, and possibly this is what makes him a hero for some and a villain to others. Love him or hate him, the call for dialogue remains loud and clear. The feminist, meanwhile, unknowingly proved his point by relying on much moral outrage rather than a substantive debate. Well, of what use was that intellectual clash for us? But then Peterson is unmatched in his ability to shred arguments and reveal logical inconsistencies. The feminist, for all her zest, lost momentum under his logic-dominated and data-structured attack. This wasn't a debate. This was a masterclass on rhetoric and critical thought. Peterson's broader message that society must be guided by fair play and merit rather than mandatory equity is reasonable for many, even if it rubs some the wrong way. The feminists' attempt to cancel him? Let's just say that it exploded spectacularly in her face. Whether you are on Team Peterson or not, there is no denying his talent for turning hot tempers into learning experiences. And as for the feminist, maybe she needs to rethink her strategy before talking on Paula with the broadcasting powers again. Because, in the marketplace of ideas, as this debate made clear, volume is not enough. One must also be correct.